What's good, y'all? It's your boy Mycah J, and I'm back again with another video. And today I'm just gonna be doing something a little differently today. As most of you should know, you're probably used to me making a lot of videos that's related to hip-hop, but today I'll be presenting why Spider-Man 2 is still the best Spider-Man movie. To celebrate the 15th anniversary of the film's release, I'll be analyzing why Spider-Man 2 is still the greatest Spidey movie to date. Now, for those of y'all who've been following my channel for the longest time should know that ever since I was just a little toddler, I've always had a huge love for Spider-Man. I love everything about Spider-Man, whether it comes to the 90s TV series, which defined my childhood, the video games, especially the 2004 movie version, the comic books, and even as of right now, I'm literally wearing Spider-Man boxers right now, even though you probably didn't need to know that. Anyways, ever since this film was released back in June of 2002, it has been well regarded as one of the greatest superhero films ever made. And I couldn't agree more because Spider-Man 2 to me is like the holy trinity of superhero films. Why, you ask? Because it has all the elements of being a phenomenal superhero flick. After the first Spider-Man film was met with universal acclaim, and with it being a huge success at the box office in its opening week, director Sam Raimi not only had to up the ante with Spider-Man 2, but he also had to challenge himself to make it better than the first one. And man, did he deliver. Now, before I start this, I just want to say a huge shout out to Alex from HiTop Films. Y'all should really check out his channel because he has a shitload of great videos. After watching his Spider-Man 2 video, it inspired me to make my own version and explain why it's still the best Spidey film to date. So without further ado, let's break it down. I gotta say, my absolute favorite thing about this entire film was J.K. Simmons' portrayal as J. Jonah Jameson. I gotta say, casting him for this role was one of the greatest decisions in film history, if you ask me. Why? Because of the way Simmons perfectly captures Jameson's inner arrogance and flawlessness, like he's a comic book character brought to life. And every time he just pops up to the screen, it's just nothing but pure gold. I really don't have to explain much. I'll just let you see it for yourself.
But could you pay me in advance?
You serious?
Now, if you're a comic book nerd like me, then you should know that every great hero always needs a great villain. With Batman, you have the psychotic Joker. With Superman, you have Lex Luthor. But in Spider-Man 2, you have one of the best with Dr. Otto Octavius, better known as Dr. Octopus, or Doc Ock for short, played by Alfred Molina. As great as Willem Dafoe's portrayal of the Green Goblin was, Alfred Molina's Doc Ock to me is the gold standard for comic book villains brought to the big screen. Dr. Otto Octavius is a brilliant scientist who's transformed into a supervillain after a fusion experiment had gone horribly wrong. But before that, we get to look at his amazing backstory, and while it may have that typical generic superhero origin story, but there's a lot more to it because of the way how Alfred Molina takes the character to new heights by making him surprisingly relatable with his complex performance. Early on in the film, we get to see the great bond between Otto and Peter because of the way how they both share the same love for science, and also seeing the beautiful relationship with his wife played by Donna Murphy. But much like Norman Osborn, his one tragic character flaw is that he cares too much about his work. Octavius's ego becomes his downfall as he pays the price for it when his wife is tragically killed during the accident, which was pretty gut-wrenching. As a result, Dr. Octavius is corrupted by the mechanical arms that have been implanted in his back, which leads to that very horrifying but awesome hospital scene, which is inspired from the Evil Dead franchise. As a toddler, this scene scared the shit out of me because the way those mechanical arms just savagely rips those doctors apart. While it did seem a bit too violent, it demonstrated how dangerous the mechanical arms can be. And with this, Dr. Octopus is born. While I do think that J. Jonah Jameson and Doc Ock are the two greatest supporting characters of this entire film, the rest of the cast did a pretty stellar job as well, because in order to make a great film, you always need great supporting characters to help strengthen the main protagonist, especially when it comes to the interactions. I absolutely loved Rosemary Harris's performance as Aunt May in this film because I always felt like she was such a great depiction from the character from the comic books, rather than the other actress from Spider-Man Homecoming who pretty much makes Aunt May look like a supermodel, which I absolutely don't like at all. Anyways, I absolutely adored the way how she gives Peter so much strength, so much soul, and so much heart. Even though May took it hard when Peter had finally confessed that he was partially responsible for Uncle Ben's death and she walks away, but she eventually forgives Peter because at the end of the day, they're family and they stick together no matter what. My favorite scene with her is when she gives Peter that heartfelt speech about heroes.
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble. Even though sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
I gotta say, this scene always gets me every time because whenever Peter's always at his lowest, Aunt May, being the great mother figure that she is to Peter, is always there to help him get back on his feet and encourage him not to quit. And from there, I always kind of suspected that she always knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, even though they completely abandoned that in Spider-Man 3, which was a huge letdown. Now, say what you want about James Franco, but I thought he gave a fantastic performance as Harry Osborn. In the first film, you can feel so much sympathy for him because of the way how his father, Norman Osborn, valued Peter more than he valued him. In this film, you can just see him dying inside because of the fact that he's so hell-bent on wanting revenge on Spider-Man, who he thinks killed his father. There was even that one particular scene where a drunken Harry slaps the shit out of Peter not once but twice because he feels like he's more loyal to Spider-Man than he is to him.
Isn't that right? Huh? Isn't that right? Huh, brother?
I really enjoy how the fractured bond between Harry and Peter really plays a huge role in this film, especially when it reaches a breaking point where Harry finally unmasked Spider-Man, finding out it was Peter all along.
Pete. No. It can't be.
Towards the end of the movie, we are blessed with an amazing cliffhanger where Harry accidentally finds the secret lair where his father kept all the Green Goblin weapons. With all this, it sets up for Spider-Man 3 for Harry to become the next major antagonist, even though we all know how that eventually unfolded, which I will not get into because that was extremely disappointing. Even the awesome cameo appearance from legendary actor himself, Bruce Campbell.
Shoelace. You might wanna... Can I help you?
And as for Kirsten Dunst, she's kind of a tricky one. If there's one thing that most comic book fans despised about the original Spider-Man trilogy, it was definitely Kirsten Dunst's portrayal of Mary Jane, because I'm telling you, the way how people shitted on her was very brutal. Now, I will admit that, yeah, she played a much more tamer version of the character from the comic books due to the fact that she came off to be very unlikable and manipulative. And yes, it was very annoying how she always got captured by the villains, always being the damsel in distress, especially with her screaming all the fucking time.
Shut the fuck up!
But at the end of the day, it's not her fault because she just did what she was told to do. Plus, Kirsten Dunst, she's actually a very talented actress if you really think about it. I just feel like she was given a very, very terrible script, so I feel like people should blame the script, not the actress. So I feel like people should not be super harsh on her for that. And plus, to me, I thought she was alright, I didn't think she was too bad. And if I'm being honest, I thought she was very good in the first movie. I thought her character was well written because of the way how she had such a stellar arc. She grew up in a very small household with her abusive father, but every time she's with her friends, she always tries to hide that part of her life by having this typical persona as the fun party girl. Even in that one scene where Peter sees her, but she tries to hide the fact that she's a waitress from him.
Some dream, huh?
That's nothing to be embarrassed about.
The fact that this Mary Jane likes to hide her problems from people and tries to hid things from her life that she would be very embarrassed about is very similar to the character from the comic books. While I do feel like that she wasn't as good as she was in this film as she was in the first, but I thought her performance overall in this film was very decent. I really like how Peter and MJ's relationship plays a very vital role in this film due to his decisions. Every time MJ accuses Peter of not caring about her makes us feel distraught because we all know that Peter wants nothing more than to be with her and to tell how he feels for her. Every scene with those two together always has emotional weight, especially when it came to that heartbreaking scene where she eventually finds out that Peter is Spider-Man, and Peter fully explains why he couldn't be there for her because of the fact that he is Spider-Man.
I can't let you take that risk. I will always be Spider-Man. You and I can never be.
From there, Peter decides to sacrifice being with MJ to protect her and feels like it's best that she marries John Jameson because of the fact that he can't be with her due to his obligations of being Spider-Man. Not only does that break her heart, but that also breaks his as well. But in the end, MJ eventually chooses to be with Peter, leaving poor old John Jameson on the day of their wedding, which is kind of cool if you ask me. You poor son of a bitch. Even though Peter tries to turn her down again, but from there she just sets the record straight by basically saying, hey, fuck you, I'm a grown-ass woman, I can make my own decisions, if I want to be with you, I'll be with you. And she asks him,
Isn't it about time somebody saved your life?
and then they end up kissing for like 10 seconds and yada yada yada. But when we hear the police sirens, she says,
Go get him, Tiger.
with all of this shows you that every great man always has a greater woman behind them. And for Peter Parker, that would be Mary Jane Watson. Ah, the train scene. Now this is without a doubt the most quintessential scene of this entire film. Now I think most comic book fans could agree that thrilling action sequences have become the staple when it comes to the comic book genre. For me, the train scene in this film is definitely the greatest one of all in my opinion. It's undoubtedly one of the greatest action set pieces not just in comic book movie history but in cinema history period. With it being 15 years old, the subway train scene in this film holds up so amazingly well because just seeing Spider-Man and Doc Ock trading blows back and forth when they start brawling on the clock tower and how they eventually fall on the train, they fight all over the train, and just to see how that all played out was just such a thing of beauty. The part where the scene gets really good is when Doc Ock disables the brake for the train, causing it to go extremely fast without anything stopping it.
You have a train to catch.
With that, it puts Spider-Man in a huge predicament where he has to find a way to stop the train before all the passengers get killed. With the stakes being supremely high, Peter shoots multiple spiderwebs at the building, using himself as a brake for the entire train. By giving it his all, showed Peter Parker at his most powerful. This was definitely the most heroic display of any superhero, and seeing the intensity was just so epic as hell. After putting too much strength in his entire body, he eventually faints, but before he falls off the train, the passengers on the train catch him. With the music playing in the background and just seeing how the people gently carry him back into the train is what made this such a human moment. Sure, yeah, it may be a bit simple, but yet it's so impactful.
He's just a kid. No older than my son.
What makes this scene so gratifying is the fact that throughout this entire film, Peter struggles to balance his life and also sacrificing to help others, but every time he does, bad things always happen to him. So for once, we finally get to see the gratitude from the passengers of the train. They were so grateful for how Peter saved their lives, so in return, they decided to save his life by catching his fall. Even with Peter being unmasked and being surrounded by the civilians, they decided to keep a secret.
We found something. We won't tell nobody.
Luckily, that was in 2004, because if this was 2019, people would have been whipping out their smartphones, and just like that, within a minute, Peter Parker's secret identity would have been exposed globally. But overall, this scene was just absolutely beautiful, and it's definitely the greatest scene of this entire film. Since 2002, there have been 3 actors who played the live-action role of both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. The inaugural actor Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and the current actor playing the role right now, Tom Holland. Out of all of them, Tobey Maguire to me will always be the best one because not only did I feel like he perfectly embodied the character of Peter Parker, but I also feel like he was the most accurate Peter Parker from the comic books, especially from the 60s. While Andrew Garfield is a phenomenal actor, he really is, I just was never a fan of his version of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and I damn sure was never a fan of the Mark Webb Spider-Man movies. Because he just absolutely lacked the character of what makes Peter Parker, because his version always came off very super smug, arrogant, and pretty much made him look like a total asshole. But I will say, what I did enjoy about the Mark Webb Spider-Man films was the chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone, because I gotta say, those two were so great with each other because the way how they perfectly communicated with each other. Because after all, they were dating in real life, so it made a lot of sense. As for Tom Holland, he's great. You know, I find him way more enjoyable than Andrew Garfield, although I'm not high on him like most people are, because I gotta say, people absolutely adore Tom Holland as the new Spider-Man. And that's fine, because not only does he like perfectly capture the more humorous side of the character, he's the one who actually makes Peter Parker look like an actual teenager than making him look like an adult. However, with that being said, my biggest gripe with his version of Spider-Man is that instead of being Spider-Man, he's more relegated to being Tony Stark's bitch. pretty much just being Iron Man Jr. And while I don't think that's much of a problem, because I do enjoy the relationship between the two, especially the way how Tony teaches him how to be a better hero, but it's just that everybody should know that Spider-Man's always been more of like an established standalone hero rather than being a follower, because I just feel like that's just kind of really stokes my nerd rage a little bit. So with that is the main reason why I think Tobey Maguire will always be the most superior actor to play both Spider-Man and Peter Parker. Although I never really understood the hate for Tobey Maguire, because he was actually a great actor. He really was, because I swear the hate that he gets nowadays is so ridiculous because of the way how people were always bitching and complaining about him crying all the time. I always feel like that came from the memes, because trust me, there is like a shitload of memes of Tobey Maguire crying. Although I will admit that, yeah, he does make some very funny facial expressions, especially like the way he looked constipated in the train scene in the second film. But even with that, I feel like people shouldn't be so harsh on him, and I feel like they should not let that overshadow of how great he actually was in the films. Because first off, he didn't cry as much as everybody thought he did, because I watched all the films millions of times, and second, all the times that he cried was due to very understandable circumstances. Like in the first movie, when he found out that Uncle Ben got shot, of course he should cry, because for God's sakes, the man raised Peter like he was a father to him, so of course he should cry. And y'all know damn well you would have been crying too if one of your loved ones were dying right up front of you. After graduating high school, he cries afterwards because he feels super guilty for being partially responsible for Uncle Ben's death because he didn't stop the burglar when he should have, even though he didn't know he was gonna eventually kill Uncle Ben, but still. And in Spider-Man 3, when Venom stabbed Harry, of course he should cry because the two were childhood best friends. And while sure, yeah, they've had their differences and they've had a pretty rocky friendship, but even throughout thick and thin, they still remain best buddies, so of course he should cry. Another huge criticism of Tobey Maguire's performance is that he was never too quippy enough because of the way he never pulled that much jokes. Now, in some ways, yeah, I do agree, he wasn't as humorous as Garfield or Holland, but that never bothered me at all because I thought he was funny at the right time when he needed to be funny, because it's not like he never pulled any jokes, because I thought the jokes actually worked.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
I knew you two were in this together.
Hey, kiddo, let mom and dad talk for a minute, will you?
Sorry I'm late. It's a jungle out there. I had to beat an old lady with a stick to get these cranberries. Here's your change!
So for anybody who tries to disrespect Tobey Maguire ever again, you know what I'm gonna do?
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye.
Goddamn right I will. All I'm trying to say is people need to put some respect on Tobey Maguire's name, because not only was he the first ever actor to play both roles cinematically, not only did he make it iconic, but his portrayal of Spider-Man is what defined a whole generation of future superhero movies. While the first X-Men movie definitely deserves all the credit in the world for help kickstarting the entire modern day movie genre, paving the way for most of the Marvel films that we see today, including the Avengers, and most importantly casting Hugh Jackman as the Wolverine, aka the greatest superhero performance of all time in my opinion. But the first Spider-Man movie is definitely what took it to the next level when it broke numerous records when it was released back in May of 2002. It became the first film in cinematic history to earn over $100 million at the box office in its opening weekend. With that, Spider-Man became a worldwide phenomenon as it became more famous than ever, and Tobey Maguire was the one who did that. I also liked that when things got serious, he always took the situations very seriously when he should. Sure, he wasn't as playful as the character should be, but I just loved how his portrayal always maintained the essence of the character, so that way I could take his portrayal very seriously. In the first movie, Maguire absolutely killed it as nerdy Peter Parker because of the way how he played such a believable nerd. You could just look at this guy and you could tell he just had no chance because of the way he was so easily picked on. But in Spider-Man 2, he had such a beautiful character arc because of the way he struggles to balance his life as both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Due to his priorities of being Spider-Man, it takes a toll on his personal life because throughout this entire film, Peter Parker is just pretty much a human punching bag. I mean, seriously, like throughout this entire film, he just gets battered both physically and emotionally because every time he wins as Spider-Man, he always loses as Peter Parker. He gets fired from his job, he struggles to keep up with the school work, his Aunt May faces eviction, his best friend Harry wants nothing to do with him, his longtime crush Mary Jane has given up on him, even his job at the Daily Bugle isn't getting better either because of the way how Jameson has turned all of New York City against Spider-Man. I just really like it's hard for Peter to deal with all this because those are one of the fundamental aspects about Peter Parker is that he can't catch a break at all, making him the most relatable superhero. Well, I don't think that Tobey Maguire is necessarily the be-all end-all actor to play Spider-Man and Peter Parker, but I feel like he was the one who came closest to the character from the comic books because the way he brought such a certain realism to the character that we can all identify with, an everyday guy with real-life problems, which makes him very relatable. Fun fact, did you know that after suffering multiple injuries in his back while filming Seabiscuit in late 2002, Tobey Maguire was nearly replaced by Jake Gyllenhaal, who was dating his co-star Kirsten Dunst at the time. But due to his successful recovery, he was able to reprise his role with a $17 million salary. Imagine if they went with Gyllenhaal. I'm pretty sure Maguire would have reacted like this.
Vindicated!
All I'm trying to say is Spider-Man 2 is not just a great superhero flick, but also a great movie in general, because not only does it demonstrate life lessons, it also teaches you that life isn't always fair and that it can be bad. But even with that, the good things come with it to make it worthwhile, allowing you to get back on your feet, dust yourself off, and move along. And I especially love how this film perfectly captures the essence of what makes Peter Parker / Spider-Man who he is, which is one of the main reasons why to this very day, this is not just only my favorite comic book film, but also one of my all-time favorite films. A lot of people will say that Sam Raimi fans are just blinded by nostalgia, so with that, I decided to watch the whole entire film for like the millionth time, but to look at this very closely, carefully, and very objectively to prove them wrong. Even while looking for its tiny bit of flaws in it, I absolutely adore everything about this film, which is the main reason why I think Spider-Man 2 was, is, and always will be the greatest Spider-Man film to date. And I think my time here is done. Anyways, I just want to thank y'all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for weekly videos. I'm your boy Mycah J, and peace.
Pizza time.